Okay, let's start out by creating an empty phrase. We'll go to examples, piano, and drag, better yet, rather than dragging, let's put the cursor at the beginning, excuse me, of the composition. Then we'll right click on Piano Basic 1 and just hit insert. Alright? And we can click on the phrase, we'll hear it. Okay, now double click on this and that'll open up the phrase editor. Then we're going to hit Control A to select all and then the delete key, and we'll click on apply changes to phrase and composition, and we end up with an empty phrase. Okay, you'll see having an empty phrase container is handy. So now we need to save this, so we'll right click on it and we go down here to save selected phrases, and I created a group called empty, and this one is just one bar, so let's just call this one bar test. Okay, and you gotta select this save selected phrases. You have to do that after you give the names to like your subfolder and the actual name of the phrase, and then hit save selected phrase. And there we've got it. One bar test, it's 4 beats. 4 beats is one measure. Okay? Alright, so now we've got an empty phrase which we can use to experiment a bit with these phrases. So I'm going to double click on this, and naturally the phrase editor is empty because this phrase is empty. Okay, now I want to direct your attention up to the top here, and you notice C major, that's the scale we're in, and then it's got these Roman numeral 1, which stands for the first chord of the scale, major. Don't worry about the closed, that has to do with voicing. We'll get to that in some later video. But anyway, so 1 major. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to double click and create a note at C4. And let's just create a quarter note at C4. And we'll double click on the E4 that it is. Drag that out to make it 1/4 note. We'll double click on the G4. And we'll double click on the C4 again. Okay, so if I hit spacebar, it's going to play this phrase. Alrighty. Now, I'm going to scroll down to center it. See if I can zoom in on this. Yeah, it looks like I can. Okay. Alright, so notice our notes here are C, E, G, and C. And they have these, the ampersand and a number after in each note on the left-hand side. And what these numbers stand for are chord note relative numbers. Okay? And the way to understand this is that we have a triad here, and the first note of a triad, which generally we call the root note, is designated number 1. Okay? The next note of a triad, which is the third, is designated number 2, And the third note of a triad, which is the fifth, is designated number 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, which correspond to the root of the triad, C, the third of the triad, E, and the fifth of a triad, G. And then we're back to the root again, which is C. Now notice that when we refer to root, third, and fifth, what we're talking about are intervals. So a third is a 3 steps up from the root, and a fifth is 5 scale steps up from the root. So that's what we're referring to normally when we talk about the third and the fifth or the seventh or the ninth. We're talking about the distance, the intervallic distance between a root and one of the chord notes. Okay, but as you can see, the third here is given the number 2. Okay, so don't confuse these numbers like the third. This number 3 does not refer to the third of the chord. It refers to the third note of a triad. Okay? Now, you might anticipate and wonder, well, what about the seventh? If you have like a C major seventh, what would the seventh note of a chord be? And that's number 4. Okay? So it goes all the way up to 13. So you have, if I right click, I'm going to select this G. I right click, you'll notice these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These correspond to the root of a chord. The 2 is the third. Number 3 is the fifth. Number 4 is the seventh. Number 5 is the ninth. Number 6 is the 11th. And number 7 is the 13th. Okay? Don't worry about these minus these numbers here to the left of number 1, these minus. We'll figure that out later. Okay? The main thing is just to get the idea, to understand that this chord note relative mapping gives a number designation to each chord note of a chord. Okay, so with a triad you have 3 notes and they're given numbers 1, 2, and 3. Those correspond to the root, the third, the fifth. With a 7th chord, the chord note relative numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, because the 7th chord has 4 notes, unlike a triad which only has 3. And the chord notes the chord note relative numbers are 1, 2, 3, and 4 when you're dealing with a 7th chord. So 4 will stand for the 7th of the 7th chord. Okay? Now, we can, if we go up here and select, let's select number 5. Okay? Now these are scale. These are Roman. These Roman numerals stand for the first, the second degree, the third degree of the scale, the fourth degree, the fifth, the sixth, and the 7th. These are sometimes called the Nashville number system. I don't know why, but in any event, I think you all are familiar with this numbering system. So let's click on number 5 and see what happens to our phrase. Okay. Lo and behold, now number 1 is at G, number 2 is at B, and number 3 is at D. So what's happened is on a 5 chord in C major, the number 1 note is going to be the G. It's going to be the root of G major. Number 2 is going to be the third of a G major chord, and that's going to be B. And number 3 is going to be the 5th of a G major chord, and that's D. Okay? Let's do 4, okay? So we know on a 4 chord in C major, the notes of the triad are F, A, C. And that's what we have here. Number 1 is on the F, number 2 is on the A, number 3 is on the C. Okay? Let's do 2 minor. Okay? So we know the second chord in a C major scale, a chord built on the second degree, is D, F, A. It's a minor chord. And here we have number 1 is on the D, number 2 is on the F, number 3 is on the A. So that checks out. Now if we change this to major, which is not a diatonic chord in C major, you can see what happened is that this number 2, a 2 major chord, this number 2 changed from F to F sharp. Okay, the other 2 remain the same. Let's bring that back down to minor, and it's back to F. So let's change this to 2 diminished. Okay, and sure enough, what happened is the D and the F remain the same, but in a D diminished triad, the the A is flattened. Okay, so you see this, it's on the G sharp or the A flat, depending. Those two are enharmonic, obviously. Okay, so whatever chord you have up here is going to determine how these notes are mapped. Okay, so we'll go back to major 1 in C major, which is C, E, G. Okay, now so let's see what happens. So now we have this phrase which consists of, it's like instructions to the program. It's saying play the first note of a triad for 1 quarter, quarter note long. On the second beat, play the second note of a triad for 1 quarter note long. On the third beat, in 4/4 that is, play the 5th of the triad, or the third note of a triad, which is the 5th, for 1 quarter note. And then on the 4th beat, go back and play the root of a triad for a quarter note. So this chord note relative is like a series of instructions which are dependent on the chord in the master track. Okay, so I'm going to hit apply changes to composition. Now we can see this if we move this phrase to this measure, we can see how the phrase has changed. Now it's playing F, A, C, F, because it's a 4 chord up here on the master track. Remember when we were in the phrase editor, if we change this to 4, okay, it's going to play FAC. So that's exactly what's happening in the composition. It's going to play FAC. Now if we move this phrase to the third measure, it's going to play GBD. Okay? GBD. And if we move it back here, it's going to play CEG. Okay? So that's a brief introduction to chord note mapping. And remember, you can dive into this by right-clicking on a note in the master track and seeing what number designation it's given here. Okay? So that's the first part. We'll come back again and we'll start to look at this these offsets and check out how they work. Okay, great. All right, we'll see you at the next video.